So the last thing I wanted to go over are the costs for hosting an application like this. It depending on the level of usage that you're expecting, it can be really cheap to just really quickly spin up an application and host an application all serverless on Azure. But um, let me just show you how much it's costed so far in just creating this application, testing the application. And the great thing about the pay-as-you-go model is you only pay for when it's used. So if it never gets used, then you won't get charged. With the exception of there is the storage account that you will be charged for, but it's very minimal. And so just really quickly to get to kind of the quickest way that I've seen to get to the billing and provide an overview, just go over to the resource groups, click the resource group that's associated with the app that you create, and then go to resource costs here. And that'll load up. And right now, for all of the testing and the functions that I've done in the storage, the uploading, it's costing me 29 cents. And so it breaks down what the actual costs are with the actual application, and most of it is coming from the file write operations. And so when I'm uploading my documents to the function, and this is possibly due to the logs too, because when your application is running, it's writing to the logs on your storage account. As you can see, there's nothing else over here. And let me just give you a quick, if you wanted to do an estimate of, hey, how much my application cost, there is an Azure calculator. If you just Google Azure calculator, there's a pricing calculator that you can use to figure it out. The great thing about Azure Functions is the first 1 million calls is free. So if your application is just used very minimally, then you won't pay for anything except for the storage that's associated with that application. So this is taking a little longer to load up than it should. Let me refresh that again. Here we go. So when you go to the pricing calculator, you can just choose what you're actually using for your application. I'm not using any kind of SQL or anything like that, but I am using the Azure Functions, and I'm using storage. And what that will do is it will add it to your calculator down here. It's supposed to, but I think that it is not running right now. Let me refresh this. And here we go. So it's added the functions and the storage. And so let me just add some more storage ones down here because we have different storage. So we have this table storage, we have blob storage, and we are using queue storage, and we're using the file storage. So I'm going to add one more storage down here. File storage. So file storage is what's hosting our actual Azure Functions, and then it also has the logs. In the blob storage, that's the one that's actually hosting our static files, our HTML, CSS, JavaScript. The table storage is our database that we're using, and the functions are the functions that we're using. And so really quickly, most of our operations have been under a second. I'll just run one really quickly to show you how you can see that. So when I go and let's just retrieve a node from Azure and run this. In the actual log, it'll show you how quickly the application runs. And so this one was longer than expected because it so the functions actually kind of sleep for a while. It takes a little while for it to boot up, and so once you run it once, it'll boot up, and then the next time it'll be faster. So first time was about a minute The second time was 13 milliseconds. And so as this is running, you can see how long it takes. So usually it's going to be under, for something that's not that complex, it's going to be under a second. And so let's go back to our calculator. And so the memory size it was a pretty small function, so it's not going to take that much. But as you can see, the first 1 million executions are free. So as long as your functions, your application altogether, the functions are triggered less than 1 million times, it's going to be free. So let's just do 2 million, 1, 2, 3. And so for an extra million, you would be paying 20 cents. So it's just something to consider. If you're running a function on a trigger that's running every second, you know, that this can add up pretty quickly. If it's running every minute, those are just things that you want to consider. For triggers that are functioned through HTTP, you know, those are probably fewer than if you had it on a trigger. But let's just go down here. So if you did want to mess around and see how much it's going to cost you, you can just edit in here. I just think it's great because the first million are free. Let's do 3 million. That would cost you $6 a month. If your functions were executed for 2 seconds, it took 2 seconds, and there were 3 million. If this was 1 second, it'd be 40 cents. So the more complex it's going to be, the more memory it takes, the more expensive it's going to be. So the more you can keep it down to a minimum, the better. For storage, table storage, if you just estimate a gigabyte of table storage, which is a lot, then it would just cost you, and then the transaction, this is per 10,000, so that's actually 100 times 10,000 transactions. That would be 11 cents. If it was a lot more, let's just say 10 gigabytes of storage, which is a lot for strictly data, it would only cost you 74 cents a month. For blob storage, 1,000 gigabytes is a lot. Let me just look at our static files here and see how big that is. It was 732 kilobytes, and so if you just had 1 gigabyte and then the write operations, this is also per 10,000 here. You can just kind of give you a rough estimate of how much you can expect to pay for the storage here. This is a lot, but it's still only $1.06 a month. For file storage, it's the same kind of concept. You can use a calculator to try to figure out what your costs are going to be. This one, it's our file storage is nowhere near 100 gigabytes. If it was 1 gigabyte, you'd be paying 9 cents a month. For blob storage, you can adjust that as well and see how much you expect to pay for a month. And so one of the great things about using Azure is you can really quickly spin up an application and use it for a week, a month, several months, and then when you're not using it, you can just disable it, but you're not paying for time that you're not using it. So that's one of the great things about serverless and this model of pay as you use it, pay as you go. So that concludes the serverless application with Azure. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact me.